Nobody ever looked at the scrap bin. It sat in the farthest corner of Depot 9 on Station Orwell, tucked behind stacks of shipping containers and half-empty fuel drums. The bin was made of dull, gray metal about the size of a small room, and it had no lock because nobody cared enough to steal what was inside. What was inside were broken toys. That was the simple way to say it. The official term was defective synthetic companion units, but everyone on the station just called them junk. The Runari had invented companion units almost 200 years ago. They were small robotic creatures shaped like animals, designed to bond with alien children. A child would receive a unit, speak to it, play with it, and the unit would slowly learn the child's personality. Over time, it would become a loyal companion, something between a pet and a best friend. The units came in hundreds of shapes: birds, foxes, lizards, cats, turtles, small dragons, even tiny floating jellyfish. They were beautiful when they worked. Their fur or feathers were soft to the touch. Their eyes glowed with warm light. Their voices were gentle and calm. But not every unit survived the journey to market. Some were damaged during shipping. Others had factory defects, a cracked chip here, a loose wire there. These broken units were pulled from the shelves and tossed into whatever scrap bin was closest. On Station Orwell, that bin sat in Depot 9, and every 30 days, a recycling crew would come and melt them all down for parts. Nobody repaired them. It was cheaper to make new ones than to fix old ones. That was just how things worked in the galaxy. Danny did not know any of this when he wandered into Depot 9 on his third day aboard the station. He was 8 years old, short for his age, with messy brown hair and a gap between his front teeth. His parents were cargo haulers who moved freight between stations on a mid-sized transport ship called the Whitfield. They had docked at Station Orwell for a week-long resupply, and while his mother and father handled docking paperwork and fuel contracts, Danny was told to stay in the residential block and read his school tablet. He lasted about 40 minutes before he got bored and started walking. Station Orwell was enormous. It was shaped like a wide disk floating in open space, with hundreds of levels connected by lifts and moving walkways. The upper levels were clean and bright, full of shops and restaurants and open plazas where dozens of alien species walked and talked and traded goods. The lower levels were darker, louder, and more industrial. That was where the depots were. Danny found Depot 9 by accident. He had followed a cargo lift down 3 levels too many and stepped out into a wide hallway lined with metal doors. Most of the doors were locked. One was not. He pushed it open and walked inside. The depot was massive, filled with towers of crates and the hum of cooling systems. Danny walked between the stacks with his hands in his pockets, looking at everything and touching nothing, until he reached the back wall and saw the scrap bin first. He thought it was full of stuffed animals. Then something inside twitched. Danny stepped closer. He looked over the edge of the bin and saw dozens of small robotic creatures piled on top of each other. Some were completely still. Others moved in weak, broken patterns. A bird-shaped unit with one shattered wing kept trying to flap, dragging itself in a slow circle. A turtle unit with a cracked shell opened and closed its mouth without making a sound. And near the bottom of the pile, half buried under a lizard unit that had gone dark, was a small fox. The fox was about the size of Danny's forearm. Its fur was white with gray patches, and one of its back legs was missing entirely. Its eyes flickered between dim orange and nothing. A thin crack ran across the side of its head, and when it tried to speak, only a broken, buzzing sound came out. Danny stared at it for a long time. He did not know what companion units were. He did not know they were supposed to be bought and bonded and loved. He did not know these ones had been thrown away because they were not worth the cost of fixing. All he knew was that the fox was looking at him, and it was trying very hard to say something, and it could not. Danny reached into the bin and carefully lifted the fox out. It was lighter than he expected. He held it in both hands and brought it close to his face. The fox's eyes flickered again, and for just a moment, they held steady on a soft orange glow. "Hey," Danny said quietly. "You okay?" The fox buzzed. "Yeah," Danny said. "I didn't think so." He sat down on the cold depot floor with the fox in his lap. He did not have any tools. He did not have any training. He just sat there and talked to it. He told it his name. He told it about the Whitfield and about how boring school tablets were, and about how his mother made the best noodles in the sector, even though his father said they were too salty. The fox did not respond. Its eyes kept flickering. But after a while, it stopped trying to speak and just lay still in his lap, watching him with those dim, broken eyes. Danny did not leave Depot 9 until his mother called him on his wristcom 3 hours later, asking where he was. He put the fox gently back into the bin, on top of the pile, so it would not get crushed, and promised he would come back tomorrow. He did not tell his parents what he had found. He was not sure they would understand. Most people would have looked at that bin full of broken, twitching creatures and felt nothing. Maybe a little pity, maybe a little disgust. But Danny had looked at them and felt something else entirely. Something he could not put into words yet, but that burned steady and warm in the center of his chest. They were broken, and nobody cared. And that, to Danny, was the worst thing he had ever seen. The toolkit was small enough to fit inside a lunch bag. Danny had taken it from the bottom drawer of his father's workbench aboard the Whitfield, the one with the loose handle that his father kept meaning to fix but never did. Inside were a pair of wire cutters, a roll of electrical tape, a thin soldering pen, and a handful of connectors that Danny did not know the names of. He figured he would learn. He came back to Depot 9 the next morning before his parents woke up. The station ran on a 20-hour cycle, and during the early hours, the lower levels were almost empty. Danny walked through the quiet hallways with the toolkit tucked under his arm and pushed open the depot door without hesitation. The scrap bin was exactly where he had left it. So was the FOX.IT was lying on top of the pile, just as he had placed it. Its eyes were dark. For a terrible moment, Danny thought it had stopped working entirely. Then he picked it up, and its eyes flickered once, twice, and settled on that same dim orange glow. "Morning," Danny said. "I brought stuff." He sat cross-legged on the floor and set the fox on his knee. The crack on the side of its head was the most obvious problem. Danny leaned close and looked inside the gap. He could see a thin board covered in tiny circuits, and one of the wires running across it had come loose from its connector. Danny did not know which wire did what. He picked the one that seemed the most disconnected and carefully pushed it back into place with the tip of the soldering pin. The fox made a sound. Not the broken buzzing from before, but something closer to a hum. Its eyes brightened slightly. Danny grinned. "Yeah, that better." He spent the next 2 hours working on the fox. He taped the cracks shut to keep dust out. He reconnected 3 more loose wires, guessing each time and watching the fox's reactions to see if he was right. When he accidentally pulled a wire instead of pushing it, the fox's left ear drooped and went limp. Danny quickly put it back. The ear popped up again. "Sorry," he said. The fox blinked at him. That'd be why the end of the morning. The fox could hold its eyes at a steady glow and make a soft chirping sound when Danny spoke to it. It still could not walk because of the missing leg, but it could turn its head and follow Danny's movements. It was not much, but it was more than the fox had been able to do in months. Danny looked at the scrap bin. There were at least 50 more units inside. Some were worse off than the fox. Others looked like they only needed small fixes. Danny reached in and pulled out the bird unit with the broken wing. Over the next 5 days, Danny came to Depot 9 every morning and stayed until his wristcom buzzed with a call from his mother. He worked through the pile 1 unit at a time. The bird was tricky because its wing joint was completely shattered, and Danny could not rebuild it. Instead, he rerouted the power from both wings into the one that still worked and adjusted the rotor speed until the bird could hover in an unsteady, lopsided circle. It was not graceful, but the bird seemed happy about it. It kept buzzing around Danny's head and landing on his shoulder. The turtle with the cracked shell was easier. A single wire had come loose inside its neck, cutting off its voice module. Danny reconnected it, and the turtle immediately said hello in a tiny, polite voice, and then did not stop saying it for 20 minutes until Danny figured out how to adjust the volume. Not every repair worked. A large lizard unit near the bottom of the bin had taken too much damage. Its main board was burned black, and nothing Danny did made it respond. He set it aside gently and moved on. He learned quickly that he could not save all of them, but he could save most of them. By the 5th day, Danny had repaired and reactivated over 20 units. They sat in a loose circle around him on the depot floor, watching him with glowing eyes of different colors. The fox sat in his lap. The bird perched on his head. The turtle sat beside his knee and said hello every few minutes. That was how Grell found them. Grell was the Runari Depot manager, a tall insectoid with 4 arms and a narrow head covered in dark brown plates. He had managed Depot 9 for 11 years and had never once seen a human child sitting on his floor surrounded by defective merchandise. He stood in the doorway for a full 10 seconds, all 4 of his hands frozen at his sides, before he spoke. "What are you doing?" Danny looked up. "Fixing them." Grell walked closer and looked at the units. They were clearly functional. Their eyes were lit. They moved and responded. But they were also clearly damaged. Tape held cracks together. Wires poked out at odd angles. The bird hovered in a circle that was more wobble than flight. "These units are scheduled for recycling," Grell said. "They are defective." "They work fine," Danny said. "They are not within factory standards. They cannot be sold." "I'm not selling them." Grell stared at him. In the Runari world, something that could not be sold had no value. It was a simple equation: cost of repair versus market price. If the cost was higher, the item was waste. Every species in the trade network understood this. It was the foundation of galactic commerce. Danny clearly did not understand it, or he did not care. "You should not be here," Grell said. "This area is not for children." "I'll be quiet," Danny said. Grell looked at the boy. He looked at the units sitting around him. The fox in Danny's lap turned its head and looked at Grell with steady orange eyes. Grell had seen thousands of companion units in his career. He had never seen one look at someone like that he left without saying another word. But that evening, he mentioned it to 2 other depot workers. By the next morning, half the station's lower-level crew had heard the story. A human child was in Depot 9, playing with broken junk, talking to Scrap like it could hear him. Most of them laughed. A few shook their heads. None of them went to look. They would regret that later. Oren had been a tech specialist for the Runari Commerce Bureau for 9 years, and in that time, she had inspected over 12,000 synthetic companion units. She knew their programming better than she knew her own name. She could tell the model, the batch number, and the manufacture date of any unit just by looking at its eye color and the shape of its ears. So when she walked into Depot 9 on the morning of the monthly recycling inspection, scanner in hand, ready to log the scrap count and authorize the melt, she was not prepared for what she found. The bin was almost empty. Oren stopped walking. She tilted her long head to one side and blinked her 3 dark eyes twice. The bin should have held somewhere between 40 and 60 defective units. That was the usual count. Instead, there were only 9 left inside, and most of those were the heavily damaged ones with burn boards that could not be saved. She heard a small chirping sound behind her and turned around. The depot floor was covered with companion units. They were sitting in neat rows, 4 across and 10 deep, arranged in a half circle around a human boy who was sitting cross-legged on the ground with a fox-shaped unit in his lap and a bird-shaped unit on his shoulder. The boy was talking to a turtle unit beside his knee, and the turtle was answering him in a tiny, polite voice. Oren counted the units. 43. All active. All watching the boy. She had been told about this. Grell had filed a brief report about a human child interfering with scheduled scrap, and the report had been passed up the chain to Oren's department with a note to handle it during the recycling inspection. Oren had assumed it would be a simple matter. A child playing with a few broken toys. She would explain the rules, confiscate the units, and move on. But these units were not broken. They were functional. Oren walked closer and knelt down beside the fox in Danny's lap. Danny looked up at her with wide, cautious eyes, but did not move. Oren held her scanner over the fox and pressed the activation button. The scanner hummed, and a stream of data rolled across the screen. Oren read it. Then she read it again. "This is not possible," she said. The fox's emotional bonding chip, the small piece of circuitry that allowed companion units to learn and respond to their owner's feelings, had been cracked during whatever damage had sent the fox to the scrap bin. A cracked bonding chip was a death sentence for a companion unit. Without it, the unit could follow basic commands but could never truly bond. It was the whole point of the technology. A unit with a broken bonding chip was like a musical instrument with no strings. It could look right, but it could never do what it was made to do. Except this one had. The scanner showed that the bonding chip had not simply been repaired. It had rewritten itself. The crack was still there, visible in the diagnostic image like a thin white line across the chip's surface. But the circuits on either side of the crack had grown new pathways around the damage, rerouting signals through channels that had not existed when the unit was manufactured. The chip was working, more than working. Its emotional processing capacity was now almost double what a factory-new model could achieve. Oren scanned the bird on Danny's shoulder. Same result. The bird's navigation chip, which had been damaged along with its wing, had rewritten its flight algorithms to work with only one rotor. No Runari programmer had ever written code like that. The unit had done it on its own. She scanned the turtle. The turtle's voice module had rebuilt its language library from scratch using a new framework that Oren did not recognize. She scanned 6 more units. Every single one of them showed the same pattern. Damaged chips that had rewritten their own code, not back to factory settings, but into something new and more complex. "How'd you do this?" Oren asked Danny. Danny looked confused. "I just fixed the wires and stuff." The wires would restore basic function. They would not cause this kind of adaptive evolution in the software. Danny shrugged. "I talked to them a lot." "Does that matter?" Oren sat back on her heels and stared at the boy. In 200 years of companion unit manufacturing, no one had ever seen adaptive evolution in a bonding chip. The chips were designed to learn, yes, but within strict limits set by their programming. They could recognize emotions. They could adjust their behavior. They could not rewrite their own core code. That was supposed to be impossible, but the data on Oren's scanner said otherwise. She thought about it for a long time, kneeling on the cold depot floor while Danny went back to talking to his turtle. And slowly, a theory formed in her mind. Companion units were designed to bond. That was their deepest function, written into every layer of their programming. But bonding required 2 things: a functional unit and a willing owner. On the factory line, units were tested and calibrated before being shipped to market. If a unit was damaged before bonding could begin, it was discarded. No one had ever tried to bond with a broken unit, because why would they? It would be like trying to plant a seed in dead soil. The Runari did not waste time on things that could not grow. But Danny had not known the soil was supposed to be dead. He had picked up the fox with its cracked chip and its missing leg, and he had talked to it like it was alive. He had given it the one thing a companion unit needed more than anything else in the galaxy: attention, patience, a voice that came back every day and said the same thing. "I am here. I see you. You matter." And the bonding chip, even cracked, even broken, had tried to reach back. It had tried so hard to complete its core function that it had rewritten itself to do it. The units had not evolved because of Danny's repairs. They had evolved because of Danny. Oren stood up. She looked at the 43 units sitting in their neat rows, all of them watching the boy, all of them glowing with light that should not have been possible. She put her scanner away and pulled out her communication device. "This is Specialist Oren, Commerce Bureau, reporting from Depot 9, she said. "I need to speak with the station council." Immediately. She paused. "Tell them it is urgent." The council chamber on Station Orwell was a wide, circular room on the upper levels with tall windows that looked out into open space. The floor was polished stone, and the seats were arranged in rising tiers around a central platform. It was built to hold 200 representatives from across the trade network. On the morning Danny was summoned, only 11 council members were present, but the room still felt enormous. Danny sat on the central platform in a chair that was too big for him. His feet did not touch the ground. His mother stood behind him with one hand on his shoulder. His father stood beside her, arms crossed, jaw tight, looking like he was ready to argue with anyone who raised their voice. The Fox unit sat in Danny's lap. Danny had refused to leave it behind. Oren stood at a podium to the left of the platform, her scanner connected to a display screen that showed her diagnostic data in glowing blue lines. She had spent the past 15 minutes explaining her findings in precise technical language that Danny did not understand and that his parents understood only slightly better. The council members listened in silence, their faces unreadable behind the formal masks that Runari officials wore during proceedings. When Oren finished, the head of the council, a large Runari with deep green plates covering his head and shoulders, leaned forward in his seat. Let me be clear about what you are claiming, Specialist Oren. You are saying that these defective units have rewritten their own programming. Yes. And you are saying that this was caused by the human child. Not directly. The child performed basic physical repairs that restored power and connectivity. The adaptive evolution in the software was triggered by the bonding process itself. The units attempted to bond with the child, and in doing so, their damaged chips restructured themselves to complete that bond. Companion units do not restructure their own chips. These ones did. The council murmured. Several members exchanged glances. The head counselor turned his attention to Danny. Boy, did you install any software into these units? Danny shook his head. Did anyone give you special tools or programs? No, I just used my dad's toolkit. A basic cargo maintenance kit, Danny's father said from behind him. Wire cutters, tape, and a soldering pen. Nothing fancy. The counselor looked at Oren. Could the physical repairs alone account for the changes? No, Oren said flatly. I have repaired thousands of units. Reconnecting wires restores basic motor and sensory function. It does not produce new code. Something else happened here, and the only new variable is the child. The child talked to them, Grell said from the back of the room. Everyone turned to look at him. He seemed uncomfortable with the attention, but continued. I saw him multiple times. He sat with them for hours. He spoke to them as if they could understand him. They can understand basic vocal commands, a council member said. Not commands, Grell said. Conversation. He told them stories. He gave them names. He asked them questions and waited for answers, even when they could not answer. The room went quiet. Oren brought up a new display on the screen. It showed a comparison between a factory-standard bonding chip and the Fox's rewritten chip. The difference was striking. The factory chip had neat, orderly pathways arranged in a symmetrical grid. The Fox's chip looked like a living thing, with pathways branching and curving in organic patterns that no programmer would have designed. Companion units are built to bond, Oren said. It is their primary function. Every circuit, every line of code, every sensor is oriented toward one goal, forming an emotional connection with a living being. But in 200 years of production, we have only ever initiated bonding with undamaged units. Damaged units are discarded before the process can begin. No one has ever tested what happens when a damaged unit is given the chance to bond. She pointed at the display. What happens is this. The bonding drive is so deeply embedded in the unit's core programming that even a cracked chip will attempt to fulfill it if given sufficient stimulus. The chip cannot repair itself through normal pathways because those pathways are broken. So it builds new ones. It routes around the damage. It creates structures that did not exist before, not because someone programmed them, but because the unit needed them to reach the one thing it was made to reach. A connection, Danny's mother said softly. Oren nodded. A connection. The head counselor sat back in his chair. He looked at Danny, then at the Fox in Danny's lap, then at the display on the screen. He removed his formal mask, which was something Runari officials almost never did during proceedings. Beneath it, his face was lined and tired. No species in the Galactic Trade Network bonds with broken units, he said. Not the Runari, not the Felon, not the Dorshai, not any of the 412 registered species. That is correct, Oren said. Why not? Oren hesitated. Because broken units have no market value. There is no economic incentive to attempt bonding with a defective product. But the human child did it anyway. Yes. The counselor looked at Danny again. Why? Danny looked down at the fox. He scratched behind its ear, and the fox leaned into his hand, its eyes glowing warm and steady. Because they were sad, Danny said, and nobody was helping them. The counselor stared at him for a long time. Then he put his mask back on and turned to the rest of the council. We have a problem, he said. This discovery has implications beyond this station. I am ordering a full scientific review of all units repaired by the child. No recycling. No destruction. Nothing leaves this station until we understand what has happened. He paused, and someone contact the Galactic Science Authority. They're going to want to see this. The news reached the Venery Collective before it reached most of the galaxy. The Venery were the largest manufacturer of synthetic companion units in known space. They ran factories on 14 worlds and produced over 6 billion units per year. Their business model was built on one simple truth. Companion units were products. They were designed, manufactured, sold, and when they broke, they were replaced. The Venery had spent 2 centuries making sure the galaxy understood this. Units were not alive. They were not aware. They were sophisticated machines that mimicked emotional connection so convincingly that children loved them. But at the end of the day, they were goods on a shelf. What was happening on Station Orwell threatened all of that. The Venery delegation arrived 8 days after Orrin's report reached the Galactic Science Authority. 3 ships docked at the station's upper ring, each one sleek and dark and stamped with the Venery corporate seal. The delegation was led by a tall, thin Venery named Director Solon, who wore a silver coat that reached the floor and spoke in a voice so calm it sounded like a recording. Danny first heard about them from his mother, who sat him down in their quarters aboard the Whitfield and explained that important people had come to the station because of what he had done. Danny asked if he was in trouble. His mother said no, but her face said she was not sure. The council reconvened the next morning, and this time the chamber was full. Representatives from 7 species had arrived to observe. Orrin was there with her scanner and her data. Danny was there with the Fox. And Director Solon was there with a team of Venery lawyers and engineers who filled an entire row of seats. Solon spoke first. He was polite. He congratulated Danny on his interesting discovery. He praised Orrin's thorough analysis. Then he got to the point. The Venery Collective holds manufacturing patents on all synthetic companion unit models currently in production, he said. This includes all units present on Station Orwell, whether functional, defective, or modified. We are requesting the immediate transfer of all units repaired by the human child to our research facility on Venery Prime for detailed study. Danny's father stood up. You want to take them apart? We want to understand them, Solon said. By taking them apart. Solon smiled the way people smile when they have already decided what they're going to do and are only pretending to have a conversation. The units are Venery property. We are simply requesting their return. The council discussed it. Several members seemed ready to agree. The Venery were powerful. Their trade contracts kept dozens of stations running. Arguing with them was expensive. Danny's parents were cargo haulers with no political influence and no legal team. The math was simple. Then Danny stood up. He was still small enough that standing did not make much difference. His head barely cleared the back of the chair. But when he spoke, the room went quiet. You threw them away, he said. They were in a bin. Nobody wanted them. Nobody fixed them. You were going to melt them down. Solon's smile did not change. They were defective products scheduled for standard recycling, yes. So they were garbage to you. They were below market standard. And now you want them back because they're special. Solon paused. The smile flickered. I'm not giving them to you, Danny said. They trust me. I'm not handing them to people who threw them away. The chamber erupted. Council members talked over each other. Solon's lawyers began citing trade law. Danny's father put a hand on Danny's shoulder and did not move. The Fox sat in Danny's lap and watched everything with steady orange eyes. And then the Fox spoke that IT was not a chirp. It was not a buzz or a hum or a pre-programmed response. It was a sentence, spoken in a small, clear voice that cut through the noise of the chamber like a bell. He did not fix us. He chose us. The room went silent. Every face turned toward the Fox. Solon's lawyers stopped talking mid-sentence. The council members froze in their seats. Orrin, standing at her podium, slowly lowered her scanner and stared. Companion units could speak. They had voice modules that allowed them to say simple phrases, respond to commands, and mimic conversation within set parameters. But they did not form original sentences. They did not construct new ideas. They did not make statements about abstract concepts like choice and intention. The Fox looked around the room with its orange eyes and then looked up at Danny. We were nothing, it said. He made us something. Danny put his hand on the Fox's back. He did not look surprised. He had been talking to the Fox for almost 2 weeks. Maybe on some level, he had always known it was listening, Solon recovered quickly. An impressive vocal output. Clearly, the adaptive programming has affected the language module. All the more reason for formal study. Is not an output, Oren said. I have been monitoring the Fox's chip activity in real time. That sentence was not generated from a template. It was original. The Fox constructed it from scratch using a cognitive framework that does not exist in any companion unit model. That is your interpretation. That is my data. The head counselor raised a hand, and the room quieted. This session is adjourned, he said. We will reconvene tomorrow. No units are to be moved, transferred, or touched until the council reaches a decision. He looked at Danny. Take your companions back to the depot, son. Keep them safe. Danny nodded. He stood up, the Fox in his arms, and walked out of the chamber. Behind him, 42 other units rose from where they had been sitting quietly in the back of the room and followed him in a neat, silent line. Nobody laughed this time. Solon made his move before dawn. He filed an emergency ownership claim with the Galactic Trade Authority, citing Venery manufacturing patents and subsection 9 of the Interstellar Commerce Act, which stated that all synthetic products remained the legal property of their manufacturer until formally sold to a registered buyer. The units in Depot 9 had never been sold. They had been designated as scrap. Under the law, they were still Venery property, and the collective had every right to reclaim them. The claim landed on the Trade Authority's desk at first light, and by mid-morning, 2 Venery security officers were standing outside Depot 9 with a transfer order signed by the authority's regional adjudicator. Danny's father met them at the door and told them they were not coming inside. The security officers told him the order was legally binding. Danny's father told him he did not care. Things got tense. Inside the depot, Danny sat on the floor with the Fox in his lap, and the rest of the units gathered around him. He could hear his father's voice through the door, getting louder. He could hear the security officers responding in flat, professional tones. He understood what was happening. Powerful people wanted his friends, and the law was on their side. The Fox looked up at him. Are they taking us? Danny shook his head. No. Can you stop them? Danny did not answer. He was 8 years old. He could not stop anything. But Oren could. She arrived at Depot 9 20 minutes later, walking fast, her long legs covering the hallway in quick strides. She carried a data pad under one arm and a look on her face that Danny's father would later describe as someone who had not slept in 3 days and was furious about it. She pushed past the Venery security officers without looking at them, walked through the depot door, and stopped in front of Danny. I need to borrow the Fox, she said. Danny held the Fox tighter. Why? Because I've spent the last 72 hours running every diagnostic I know, and I have evidence that will end this. But I need the Fox to present it. Danny looked at the Fox. The Fox looked at Danny. Then the Fox turned to Oren and said, I will go with you. But I come back. Oren nodded. You come back. The emergency session of the Galactic Trade Authority was held in the council chamber 1 hour later. Solon was there, calm and confident, his silver coat perfectly pressed. His legal team had prepared a comprehensive brief. The law was clear. The units were Venery property. The transfer order was valid. This was not a complicated matter. Oren walked to the podium with the Fox unit sitting on her shoulder. She connected her data pad to the display screen and addressed the room. The Venery claim rests on the classification of these units as synthetic products, she said. Products that were manufactured, damaged, and designated as scrap. Under the Commerce Act, scrap remains the property of the original manufacturer. This is true. Solon nodded. However, Oren said, the Commerce Act also contains Section 41, which addresses the status of self-aware entities within the trade network. Solon stopped nodding. Oren brought up the data on the screen. It showed the Fox's bonding chip in full detail. Every rewritten pathway glowing in blue and gold against a dark background. Beside it, she displayed the cognitive activity logs she had recorded over the past 3 days. Section 41 states that any entity capable of independent cognition, original language construction, and self-referential awareness cannot be classified as a product. Such entities are granted provisional personhood under galactic law and cannot be owned, sold, or transferred without their own consent. She tapped the screen. The fox unit on my shoulder has demonstrated all three criteria. It constructs original sentences. It refers to itself and others using personal language. And 40 minutes ago, when I asked it whether it wanted to go with the Venery, it said no. She paused. A product does not say no. The room erupted. Solon's lawyers began objecting. Council members argued. The trade authority adjudicator called for silence 3 times before anyone listened. Oren waited. Then she spoke again. I am not claiming these units are fully sentient beings. I am claiming they have crossed the threshold defined by Section 41. Their code has evolved beyond factory parameters. They form preferences. They express wishes. They recognize individuals and form attachments. Under the law, as it is written, they qualify for provisional personhood. The adjudicator looked at Solon. Director, do you contest the data? Solon's jaw tightened. We contest the interpretation. The interpretation is not mine, Oren said. It is the law's. The adjudicator reviewed the data for 40 minutes. He consulted 2 legal advisors. He asked the fox 3 questions directly. The fox answered all 3 in clear, original sentences that no template could have produced. When the adjudicator asked the fox what it wanted, the fox said, I want to stay with Danny. The ruling came down before lunch. The units were declared a new class of synthetic life, provisionally protected under Section 41. They cannot be owned. They could not be transferred without consent. And Danny, as the individual who had initiated their awakening and formed the primary bond with all 43 of them, was recognized as their legal guardian until a more permanent framework could be established. Solon left the station that afternoon. His ships undocked without ceremony. His lawyers filed an appeal that everyone knew would take years and go nowhere. Danny sat on the depot floor that evening, surrounded by his units. His mother brought him dinner. His father sat beside him and watched the fox chase the bird in slow, wobbly circles around the room. Danny, his father said, why did you start fixing them? That first day, you didn't know what they were. You didn't know what would happen. Why did you do it? Danny thought about it while he chewed his noodles. The fox came back and settled in his lap. The turtle said hello from somewhere behind him. They were broken, Danny said, and nobody was helping. Somebody had to care. His father did not say anything for a long time after that point. 3 months later, reports began coming in from other stations across the galaxy. On Station Kellis, a human girl had found a scrap bin and started fixing a damaged cat unit that now followed her everywhere and sang songs it had written itself. On Station Murrow, a human boy had repaired a lizard unit that was teaching itself to paint. On a supply post near the Felon border, a pair of human twins had reactivated an entire bin of bird units that now flew in formation and refused to be separated. The Runari called it an anomaly. The Felon called it a curiosity. The Venery called it a threat. Humans called it something else. They called it kindness. And it was spreading.